Hello, hi, and welcome to Rise Like a Phoenixx, a podcast from Phoenixx Records. Today is episode 5, and we're going to be discussing indie versus major labels. I'm your host, Alfie Chevins, and today I've got two very special guests with me. I've got Mitch Abnett, who heads up our A&R department, and I've got Alex Lee, who heads up our marketing department. So gents, let's talk about the differences between indie and major labels and what impact they both have on the world of music. Mitch, I'm going to come to you first. Just talk to us a bit about major labels, what they are and how they differ from indie labels.
Well, I'd say major labels are obviously you've got the top three, which is Warner Music Group, Universal Music, and you've got Sony. All three of those have loads of sub-labels actually that they own. So Spinning Records, I believe, is owned by Sony or Universal. The difference as well is the royalty share and the contracts. So a lot of the times that you sign contracts with the major record labels, it'll be like for the foreseeable future, like the end of your life usually. There's no actual set term, like or set year or duration. Whereas with indie labels, some of them are only like a year or two long. And also the royalty split with major record labels I think is 70 to the label and 30 to the artists, or occasionally 80 to the label and 20 to the artists. But with the major record labels, sometimes you get an advancement of like a certain amount of money in the thousands to record your album or something. Whereas with indie labels, a lot of indie labels, you'll kind of just submit demos that you've already mixed, mastered and produced yourself, because they're on a lower budget to finance your own recording. And also with major record labels, if you sign to them, you're more likely to achieve worldwide success, I'd say. So with all the big artists that you see on Spotify and on the radio, like Dua Lipa, Shawn Mendes, they've all got songs licensed to Sony Music or Universal, and they're like touring the world now. Whereas indie record labels, you don't see that as much. You get a decent amount of streams on DSPs, but you don't get that kind of world tour kind of status.
And just to explain to our listeners what a DSP is.
So DSPs are like streaming services, like Spotify, SoundCloud, Deezer, Napster, Apple Music, iTunes, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's great. I think for me, one of the big differences between indie and major labels is I always view that indie labels are more kind of artistic and they're more bothered about the music, whereas with major labels it's for that factory pumped out pop. It's for people who want to make money, who want to go really big, but maybe the music is kind of a secondary or a tertiary thing in the whole world of their life. Alex, I was just wondering what your thoughts are on what the benefits of indie labels are.
Well, I'd say mainly just, as you said, artistic freedom, and also not being tied down to a contract in the same way, because it will be more of a fixed term instead of like, say, a major one. It'll be like, the rest of their life. Because I see quite a lot of like smaller bands. They tend to they'll have like an album with a different label each time. For example, whereas like if you have big band like Metallica, they'll often have a major label behind those. I can't remember which label it is, but they'll have the same label for like ages until unless it is like a fixed term, but they wouldn't just have like one label per album.
Yeah, definitely.
So
and what would you say are the downsides to indie labels, if any?
You might not get a down payment, so you'll often get like with major ones, you'll get like a set amount you can use before it comes out in the studio. Whereas with the indie one, they might not have the funds to actually do that because of how big the record label is. Also, like with a producer, like the label might hire a producer, you might not get as good of a producer. So like a major one, you could get, I don't know, like Rick Rubin, for example. Whereas you wouldn't get him if it's an indie one because of the amount of money he charges.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we see a lot of bands kind of using indie labels as a platform to get into mainstream music and those bigger labels. So I suppose indie labels do have their uses in that sense. But I agree with what you say. You know, maybe the quality of music won't be as good, but then I think music's quite a subjective thing. It depends on what you like as a consumer. Mitch, do you see much of a difference in terms of success between artists on indie labels and major labels? Not on a kind of a really kind of detailed case by case basis, but in general terms, do you see that there's a gap in the success that artists have?
Not really, because well, it depends what someone defines as success. Because success could be happiness as a career in music, or it could be, I don't know.
Let's say commercial success then, i.e., making money, being famous, that kind of thing.
I don't think it necessarily with. So, for example, one giant example is Avicii. He had major success and still wasn't that happy in the end, and didn't really speak about it to anyone. Whereas like a lot of artists love to tour. Like Martin Garrix, he is an example that I always use because he's happy touring, and he made his own. He had a lawsuit actually with Spinning Records, and he won the lawsuit. And he made his own record company after the lawsuit because he wasn't happy with how Spinning or the major record label was treating his music. But he's a prime example of someone that loves the kind of success of major record labels, because his breakthrough in music was by releasing a song through Spinning Records, Animals. So his major breakthrough was from that song.
Excellent. Alex, anything to add on that at all?
No, not really.
Excellent. So, alright then, let's think about this a different way. If you were an artist, let's say Mitch, you're like electronic synth producer, which is kind of what you do now. Alex, you're into more grunge rock stuff like that. Which kind of a label would you each choose and why? Alex, do you want to go first on this one?
I'd probably say Sumerian Records.
Okay.
So they're the record label for Alexandria.
Are they major or indie? Sorry.
They are kind of like a bit of both.
Right, okay.
It's hard to explain. Basically, they're like quite a big independent record label, but they have like ties to bigger ones, but they're not a subsidiary. So they're technically independent, but they have the pull of like a major one because of the amount of bands they have and stuff.
Okay.
And mainly the reason is that they allow you to express the artistic like stuff a lot more, while also having the pull and the resources of a major label. But the problem with that, I think, is genre. So a lot of their bands, they have a very similar, like they have Black Veil Brides as well, and I can't remember the other ones. I think Palais Royale, which were a bit different to them anyway. But it's always kind of like bands with a bit more kind of, I don't know how to explain it.
A bit more of an edge.
Yeah,
I
guess, that sort of genre, I guess, or feeling for music. Whereas they won't have like, I don't know, Ollie Murs, for instance, on there because it just wouldn't fit the label. So, yeah. And Mitch, what would you say, major or indie?
I'd probably sign with indie labels, but that are connected to major. So, for example, Sony Music owns a lot of smaller record labels, but I don't think I'd sign with say Sony Music themselves. So there's a record label called EEM Records and Ministry of Sound. They're owned by the bigger major labels, but I think I'd sign with those because you just sign one track usually. You don't have to commit to like an album or sign with the same label for say like 5 years in a row, which are a lot of artists that sign with say like it's an exclusive deal with Sony, Universal or Warner. They have to like only release for them. Whereas if you sign with like the sub labels of the giant major labels, you kind of get that freedom to like release music with different labels, so you get the like most exposure.
Yeah. So I think what you're both kind of saying there is what's appealing about releasing music is probably the money and having that major influence, that pull of the marketing that major labels have. but on the same side, you both kind of don't like the committal aspect of major label contracts, which is why an indie label or subsidiary of another label would be appealing. And also, I think you both like, as artists, that artistic freedom and expression that an indie label gives. And I think I'd be inclined to agree with that. So, how do you think that indie labels could change in terms of the music industry that we have now to become more popular?
I think with like the indie labels becoming more popular, it's more like kind of reaching the fan base. So it's a lot to do with marketing or getting the right SEO on, say, like Spotify.
Yeah.
So like using the right key phrases or words to, when someone, a listener, searches a word on Spotify, they come to your playlist first. So I think it's a lot to do with kind of seeing what's popular, what a lot of people are searching for on, say, Google. For example, TikTok, a few years ago when that first started, there's loads of TikTok playlists now, which have like thousands of followers. So I think it's the thing that the indie labels may have to do is maybe invest more in their releases so they can kind of push it out to playlist creation teams or blogs to promote it more, but also try to, see like a kind of gap in the market that all other labels aren't doing. Because you see on Spotify, you can search one word and there's guaranteed to be more or less a playlist with that word in it. So I think it's being unique, which each label has to do to become big and get the most profit.
And Alex, do you think recording on a major label is an unattainable goal for many artists, which is why they choose to be with indie labels? Or do you think it's just reserved for kind of exclusive people, so there's no point trying? Or do you think it's preference, people just prefer indie labels?
I think it depends on the genre in terms of with preference, because if it's like metal, you tend to see like a lot of metal bands, they'll start out with an independent label and then like they'll get really like big and then they'll sign with like a big label because they've had that kind of attention to get the contract. Whereas if you're talking about like indie rock, the whole kind of concept of that is not a major label, so the whole sound and the atmosphere around the tracks are going to be kind of towards that. So I think it very much varies on the genre as well.
Also with some indie labels as well, I'd say the contracts are a lot fairer.
Yeah.
It's like 50-50%. So like you've kind of done the production, mixing and mastering side of the track, and they sort out all the promotion and the pitching and the playlist creation, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it kind of saves you all the marketing work for half of the cut of the royalties. So
absolutely. Anything else that either of you want to add at all that we maybe haven't covered yet? No?
Not sure.
Not a problem. Well, anyway, that's just about all we've got time for on this episode. Thank you very much for listening in to episode 5, and we hope to see you again on episode 6 next Wednesday, 6 o'clock. Thanks very much. See you soon. Bye.